Welcome back to NRM 638, Python Scripting for ArcGIS Applications, Spring Semester 2015. This is a graduate class at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. In this session, I want to introduce you to containers that hold a single value. This type of container in Python is called a variable. And think of a Python variable as being analogous to a field in ArcGIS. Each variable will have a type. So for example, integer, floating point, character, etc. And each variable will have a value as well as other properties. In this session, we're going to work with numeric variables, and in the next session, we'll work with string or text variables. So to get started, we need to start a Python editor. So we'll go Start, Programs, ArcGIS, Python 2.7, and then IDLE. Okay, so a legal variable name starts with a letter. So for example, if we said 215 underscore year equals 2015, we'll get a syntax error because that's not a legal variable name. And you cannot start with special characters. So we can't say, for example, ampersand year equals 2015. That's an invalid syntax error. So variables typically start with a letter and typically are lowercase variables. So for example, this would be a legal variable, and this would be a legal variable, and this would be a legal variable. So we've got three variables all named year, but they're separate basically containers. This all lowercase, this one starting with an uppercase Y, and this one starting with all capitals, and they contain these as the values. Okay, to see what's inside your variables, you could simply type in the name of the variable. So for example, what's inside this variable? It contains that numeric value. If you want to see what's inside more than one variable, you can list your variables separated by semicolons. So let's see what are the values inside these three variables. So those are the values inside these three variables. If you want to see what are all the variables that the Python interpreter currently has in memory, you could use VARS, all lowercase, and then left paren, right paren. And that will show you all the variables that the Python interpreter has in memory. So here are the ones we created. Year, which contains the value 2013. This year contains the value 2014, and this all lowercase contains the value 2015. And if you want to delete variables, you could use the DEL and then the name of the variable that you want to delete. So we'll delete year. And with this IDLE interpreter, if you press Alt-P, that recalls previous command. So we could do Alt-P, show us all the variables now. And you'll notice that year is no longer in memory because we deleted it. And if we want to delete more than one variable, we would enclose in parens the names of the variables we want to delete. So let's delete year, and we'll delete year. And then once again, Alt-P to recall our previous command, and Alt-P to recall our previous command. So now we have no user variables in memory right now. Okay, remember, just like fields, variables have types. So we could create a variable, and then we could use the type function. So type, and then in left paren, the name of the variable we're interested in. What's the type of that? So it's an integer variable. Or we could say year equals 2015.0, and then Alt-P to recall our commands. What's the type of that variable now? So now it's a floating point variable. And if you want, you can convert from integer to floating point or floating point to integer using a function. So for example, we could say A is equal to int year. And then what is A? It's 2015. What is the type of A? It's integer. And we could say B is equal to float A. So what is B? It's now a floating point variable. Okay, you can also do arithmetic with numeric variables. So here we create a variable a which contains the value 5, a variable b which contains the value 2, and then we could say, well, what is a minus b? Or what is a plus b? Or what is a times b? Okay, it gets tricky when we get to division because here our variables are integers. So what is 5 divided by 2? Well, 5 divided by 2 gets rounded to the integer. So if we want to know really what's 5 divided by 2, we would use the float function. So we could say, okay, give us the result of our integer variable a, convert it to a float, and then divide it by our integer variable b converted to a float. So we get the value 2.5. Okay, what is a squared? So once again, a contains the value 5, so 5 squared gives us 25. So let's make a equal to 100, and we want to get the square root of a. So then we could say, okay, we'll take a, and we use the exponentiation operator just like we did to square it, but this time we'll say by 0.5. So 100, the square root, is 10.0. Okay, so the way the Python interpreter interprets arithmetic expressions is it will always do exponentiation first, and then it will do multiplication or division, and then it'll do addition or subtraction. So basically what it's going to do is take 3 squared, so that will give us 9, times 2, that should give us 18, plus 1, that should give us 19. So that's basically how the interpreter works with expressions. And we could use parentheses to control how we want these expressions evaluated. So for example, we could say, well, take 1 plus 2 inside of parentheses times 3 squared. And we get 27 because basically what it did was it said, okay, this results in 9, so 9 times 3 gives us 27. Okay, so sometimes we want a variable that's incrementing. So for example, from 2000 to 2015 by 1, because we want it for all the years since 2000. So typically what we're going to do is use a function called range to create those types of variables. So if you type in help and then enclosed in parentheses, you can get the help for any function in Python or any object in Python. So help range. So basically range is a function, and we specify the start, the stop, and then an interval, step interval, and that returns a list of integers. So the way it works is we could say for year in range, start at 2000 and go up to but not including 2016 and go by 1 year increments. Doing a loop, and we'll use a colon at the end of this for statement, and then everything indented underneath this for statement will be inside the loop. So then what we could do is we can say print year, and that's inside our loop because it's indented. So then basically it returns in increments of 1 from a range of 2000 up to but not including 2016. Okay, another example, we might want to go from 2015 backwards. So we could do the same thing. We could go for, and then some variable name. I'll just say count in this example, in a range from 2015 to 2000. -1 is my increment. And then once again, we need this colon to say, okay, that's the end of the for statement, and then everything that's indented is inside that loop. So we could say print count, and then execute that. So basically it goes down because of this negative increment. And we said up to but not including 2000. So you notice it doesn't go to 2000, it goes up to but not including 2000. So we're going to do a lot of looping with this range function and this for statement in this class. Okay, the other thing we commonly do with numeric variables is we format them with print statements. So for example, let's just print out 10 values and then print variable year, print what's inside that variable. So what's inside that variable is 2015. And we might want to have it such that it's right justified. So to print it right justified, we're going to use a formatting statement. So basically what this says is here's our format and it's 10 integers. So basically it'll be 10 characters. So it'll be this width. And then this is the variable that's associated with this format statement. So basically that's how we could right justify integer variables. Okay, for floating point variables, let's make a floating point variable. You might say, well, give us one decimal to the right of the, one digit to the right of the decimal place. So here's our format where we say .1f, so one digit to the right of the decimal place. And then this variable is linked to this format. So we get one decimal to the right, or one value to the right of the decimal place. If we don't want anything to the right of the decimal place, we can say 0f, and what it will do is round it to the nearest integer. So it rounds it to 57, so 56.9 gets rounded to 57. Or we might say, let's show 4 to the right of the decimal. So that would be our format would be 0.4f. Okay, so that's probably enough for this session. If you go to the Blackboard website, there's a quiz question for you, and when you successfully answer that quiz question, it will lead you to a link to our next video session, which will be working with text or character variables in Python.